So just a quick reminder, tonight's session is being recorded. But we're really honored tonight to have you join us for an evening of reflection and inspiration as we really delve into our collective journey towards healing and unity. Tonight, we're privileged to be in the company of Charles Weckend, a distinguished theologian and educator who will guide us through this exploration. Charles brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, having completed his liturgical theological studies in Rome. He's studied theology in Ottawa, in Boston. He's really made his way around, has a great academic background. His academic and spiritual journey has shaped his profound understanding of the Catholic faith and its application to today's world. He's dedicated his career to religious education, teaching at Newman College and serving as their religious education coordinator for Fort McMurray Catholic Schools, where his guidance and contributions have left an indelible mark. He really was a shepherd for us. In our time together, Charles will share his personal experiences and unpack some of the theology of Pope Francis, particularly focusing on the role of Catholic schools as pillars of compassion. Echoing Pope Francis's vision of the church as a field hospital, Charles will seek to illuminate how we can serve those in need, especially those students who are members of the queer community without judgment or prejudice. Through dialogue and deep commitment to our Catholic identity, we aim to foster an environment of understanding and acceptance. And this evening, we will embrace the diverse experiences and perspectives within our community, striving to address wounds and promote unity, central to our mission of building and nurturing a relationship with Jesus. Just another reminder, tonight's session is being recorded, and the format of the evening will have Charles leading us through his reflections, his stories, and the unpacking of Pope Francis's theology. And once that portion of the evening is over, we'll move into a question portion for the session. We ask that participants use the hand raise feature found in the reactions tab to identify that they have questions during that period. So please join me in welcoming Charles Weckend, a beak of wisdom and compassion, as he leads us in this important conversation. Charles, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to be with you. And this is a reflection on my experience. I'm not speaking so much as an expert in something, but I've been going back over some 20 years at Fort McMurray Catholic Schools, and in the intervening 5 years, my reflection has gone further. And so I'm throwing out to you, for what it's worth, the way I see things. And hopefully it's something that takes us forward in, I think, one of the most challenging areas that the Catholic Church, if not any church, is facing at our time. I've basically three things that I will say, as Chris mentioned. Our mission is to let children come to Jesus and not to hinder them. I find that we unfortunately find a lot of our sexual minority students hindered in coming to Christ, and we need to address that. That's the healing. So I'll talk about wounds that need to be healed. That'll be the first main part. And the second part is we've got to get through this time together. We've got to hold ourselves together as a group. So focusing on unity. So I'm repeating what Chris had said. So into it. Let the children come to me, and do not prevent them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Matthew 19. This is the core of Catholic education, of Catholic schools, enabling children to come to Jesus. The kingdom belongs to them. This is the most natural thing for children to do. I very often witness this natural connection with their Heavenly Father. You see it when children pray. I had a lot of experiences of that when I was with you folks. I find few things more beautiful than, say, a grade 3 teacher gathered with her students in a circle around their prayer table. There you hear their little voices saying thanks to God for things and praying for each other. It's a beautiful thing to witness. They're at home there. Saw it in Chris's classes, his Thankful Thursdays. But this coming to Jesus is natural unless we hinder them. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to be a little bit of a downer here for a few minutes, just in some of the things I've got to talk about. But there's pain that is felt when we find our kids are not being free to come to Jesus. So this coming to Jesus is natural unless we hinder them. Abuse can do this, as witnessed in clergy, sexual abuse, and residential schools. Even closer to home, in Alberta, according to the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services, 1 in 3 Albertans, 34%, experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. Just under 1 in 2 girls, it's 44%, and 1 in 4 boys, 24% in Alberta, have experienced child sexual abuse. Most of this abuse comes from family members or from persons the children know. It cuts across all social classes. That's heavy duty stuff, but I mention it because we in our Catholic schools, when I came, we're responding to that because we are Catholic schools. We started working with the CARE program, which is to protect those kids and to help heal them and their families. That's the kind of thing I'm addressing tonight, is when our kids are wounded and hurt, we respond. So another example where children's natural tendency to come to Jesus and his family can be wounded is how we treat our sexual minority kids. Don't want to lump everybody together, sexual minority kids, but because there's so much diversity, but for the sake of the time and this approach, I've got to do it. It troubled and saddened me greatly to see sexual minority children refusing to believe in God or be part of his family, his church. In our support group at Father Mercredi, I was kind of shocked when I'm not used to students doing that. I'm used to them not going to church, but with a strong negative attitude. And I asked myself, like, what twisted them? Where did this come from? Most of them came from fundamentalist churches where they were told that even the orientation that they experienced was an evil choice. They felt rejected often by their families, by their church. And of course, they also felt alienated by the treatment that others gave to them. But when I saw that, it shocked me. My gosh, a young person of this age, their whole life with God, is somehow or other being, excuse me, sorry, Lord, I may have been too hard on them, but it just shocked me. And because for the rest of their lives, they're going to be struggling with their relationship with God, and they're missing out on so much. So I have strong feelings about this. And we have a duty, I believe, to protect and defend them and to help them heal. I've had colleagues object that our schools are schools, not hospitals or therapy clinics. My response has been that Catholic schools educate the whole person, and that a troubled student has difficulty learning. We may need to stop the bleeding so that they can learn. This makes our schools very much like the field hospital described by Pope Francis. He says, I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if they have high cholesterol and about their level of their blood sugars. You have to heal their wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Let the children come to me and do not prevent them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. I now focus on 2 things regarding our sexual minority students. stopping the bleeding. The Catholic school needs to work as a field hospital. And where do we go from here? So stop the bleeding. There are at least 4 bleeding wounds of sexual minority students. I've considered these wounds carefully through Bishop Henry and the Alberta Bishop's document of a number of years ago on creating a welcoming and inclusive community for them. Not least, I've reflected on them from having my own jaw broken and suffering a concussion because somebody thought I was gay. I spent the night untreated in pain. I experienced what St. Paul describes as Christ's Spirit praying within us, Abba, Father. The whole night, as I breathed in and out, my spirit uttered Abba, the prayer of the suffering Christ in Gethsemane. The aforementioned 4 sexual minority wounds could be summarized by the 4 letters of Abba, I think. In these 4 wounds, the Spirit is praying in each sexual minority person, whether they know it or not, in their Gethsemane, Abba, Father. A stands for the wound of being alone. B stands for being bullied. Second B stands for being labeled bad. And the last A stands for agency, the lack of it, feeling powerless. So I'll go through each of these 4 now. A, for alone. We feel and are most vulnerable when we are alone. Sexual minority students can intensely feel like outsiders, disconnected from others, abnormal and not okay, carrying their burden by themselves, keeping their secret from others, and even from themselves. Feeling alone is much more devastating than feeling lonely. We are made to be in vital connection and relationship with others. Our health and well-being depend on it, all the more so in adolescence and figuring out who we are. This adolescent aloneness is acutely and dangerously exacerbated when sexual minority students cannot share their experience with their parents and family. So here are the questions that came to me and still come to me for a Catholic educator. How can our school help our sexual minority students experience their school as a place of supportive relationships, a place where they're accepted and belong? How can we encourage and support their parents to be with and accompany them? How can we help sexual minority students have good, open relationships with their parents? I see that too often in that support group. Couldn't tell their mom, or mostly couldn't tell their dad, and so on. It's so painful. How can we help our sexual minority students who have been kicked out of their homes? How can we help our sexual minority students feel that they are as normal as anybody else? How can our schools show public signs of welcome and support to our sexual minority students? Not just keeping them in the closet, but you're welcome here. How can we support our sexual minority students in developing their sense of belonging and contributing to society, not hiding from it? So that's the first wound. Crying, Abba, Father, I'm alone. Bullying. Unless you or perhaps someone close to you have experienced bullying, it's difficult to describe its corrosive effects. It's like an acid. Never feeling so safe erodes your mental, spiritual, and physical health. Whether it's the experience of macroaggression, as such as what I experienced from gay bashers, or the countless microaggressions experienced every day. Always having to be on your guard and avoiding what might be harmful is draining. It is anxiety producing and takes the joy out of life. And these microaggressions occur in many different ways. A common form is stereotypes and misleading claims about sexual minority persons. Gay students come from dysfunctional and unhealthy families. Not true. That there is a gay agenda, as if people binding together politically for their rights is wrong. That there is a gay lifestyle, as if there wasn't a heterosexual lifestyle. That gay people are more promiscuous than straight people. Not true. All these things are microaggressions when we continue spouting them out, and they imply there is something dreadfully wrong with being part of a sexual minority. And unfortunately, these are the microaggressions that bullies use to justify their gay bashing and macroaggression. Like, I'm sure the guy who hit me over the head with a bottle had heard somewhere that, gay people were perverts or something like that. So the educator in a Catholic school asks questions like this: how can our school help our sexual minority students deal with their fear and anxiety of even coming to school? How can we help them avoid being bullied at school and on social media? How can we help all students avoid and reject microaggressions such as false stereotypes about being gay? In other words, how do you help our students not perpetuate these microaggressions? How can we educate our students, staff, and families adequately about sexual minority students? How can we help sexual minority students deal with their anxiety, their depression, their temptations to suicide, and their need to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol? How can we support our sexual minority students in developing their sense of belonging and contributing to our society? How can we help these students find a place of belonging in their local parish? I don't hear that enough. Where was the last parish you were at where there was a support group for our gay kids, for our sexual minority kids? In any case, these questions were the questions I experienced when I was with you folks in Fort McMurray. A, for being alone. B, for being bullied. The second B in ABBA stands for being labeled bad. We Catholics believe that our sexuality is one of God's most wonderful gifts. Pope Benedict, with his wonderful gift of clarity, even dares to link erotic love to the unique Christian love called agape. But what sexual minority students too often hear or interpret is that their sexual orientation is disordered, but they don't hear that. What they're hearing is that they have a tendency towards acts that are always evil, and their gift of sexuality somehow or other is evil, and they're bad. They don't make those nice logical connections that people outside can make, well, everybody's got a disorder and we're all sinners. It doesn't work that way logically for a lot of these kids. That's not the way they often hear it. So unfortunately, well, like every believer, our sexual minority students are called to live the challenging gift of chastity as regulating their sexual lives by and according to the Spirit of Christ. This can, unfortunately, tempt them to see their sexuality not as a gift, but as a curse. This is especially, that saddens me so much, because there are faces and voices that come to mind just with that phrase. This is especially the case for students from those fundamentalist churches which regard a homosexual orientation as a freely chosen inclination. Students from these churches may completely withdraw from the church and feel that God hates them or deny belief in God. Every adolescent probably goes through a challenging navigation of the mystery of their sexuality, often nourished though by the hope of finding a wonderful life's partner and love. But sexual minority students face a much greater challenge when what is proposed to them is a life of celibacy, a commitment that has not infrequently been called heroic. For many, this seems like they're being doomed to a life of loneliness. So, what questions does the Catholic educator ask? How can we help sexual minority students realistically appreciate that their sexuality is a wonderful gift from God? I just need to slow that down, because the words come out so quickly from those of us in the church. Your sexuality is a wonderful gift. You're a wonderful person. You're more than your sexual orientation. We say those things. It's easy to say them. It's another thing for the person who is living it. And that's why I use the word realistically. How can we help students who feel rejected by the church and God, especially those in fundamentalist churches? Many wonderful things happen in those churches, but this one is doing damage. How can we realistically and non-hypocritically help sexual minority students who feel condemned to a life of loneliness and no romantic relationships if they follow the church's teaching. Again, if you belong to a religious community which extols celibacy, you've got a whole support system and a wonderful image of what life is like. But who's the model for our students whom we're expecting to be celibate? A, B, second B was for being labeled bad. Last A is for agency. This is the one where I've reflected more over the past years because it's the one I found the most challenging. And I think the church finds this one the most challenging too. It's called agency, A standing for agency. But the lack of agency, and I need to give a little bit of a background by what I mean here. In my experience, the lack of agency is the most challenging wound for pastors, parents, teachers, administrators, and sexual minority students themselves. I think for everybody, this one is a challenge. First, it's helpful to describe agency with an example. I used to work for SABIS, the Southern Alberta Brain Injury Society, which you've probably never heard of, because the people we represented, the brain injured, are such a small and hidden group, 2% of the population. Often they have suffered concussions in vehicle collisions, skiing collisions and falls, quad rollovers, snowmobile crashes, sports and partner violence. That's more for women. They seem mostly to be young males. I may be wrong in that. But I have images here. Those 23-year-old males with a severe brain injury can be living in a big grown man's body with the mental and tantrum control of a 2-year-old. You can imagine how hard it is to deal with these persons, not just for a day or a week, but for a lifetime. Their caregivers are often their moms. Both the brain injured and their caregivers need support, but nobody knows or pays attention to this. They have little power or agency because of being a small proportion of the population, and caregivers don't have the time or energy to advocate for their needs. What do we do when we have no agency and need support and to have our needs recognized? We come together and form support groups. We undertake political action to get social recognition. So part of my job was to lobby the government to get their attention. It was political. As part of this, we established Brain Injury Awareness Week. This coming together for support and political action to get needs and rights publicly recognized is what people do when they have little or no agency. And this is what sexual minority persons need to do also. They need to come together for support. They need to advocate for a recognition of their rights and needs. It is a natural and necessary human process, which unfortunately some try to repress. Now, in what I've said here could be a source of conflict, because one school of thought will say that in our schools, we should be integrating all those students who feel marginalized into the same process. And here, what I am saying is, if you're part of a sexual minority, I think you need to have also a focus on your identity that way. So there could be a debate here. In any case, sexual minority students can feel especially powerless against the overwhelming power of the surrounding world. They are a minority of perhaps about 3% of the population. In a climate of non-acceptance, they can feel forced to live a life hidden in the closet instead of being who they are publicly. Constantly living in fear and shadows of various kinds of attacks, they can lack agency. I think we have to remember that agency is a gift of Christ's Spirit, what Scripture calls fortitude or courage. It's not by accident that Bishop Henry's LGBTQ plus support group was called, in Calgary, was called Courage. And other groups have the same name, Courage. That's agency. Agency is the strength and the courage to proclaim what is right and what is true, to proclaim the dignity that God gives to us, to his lowly ones. Unfortunately, this courage often troubles the powerful of this world. Our Lady, our Mother Mary, had this agency in the face of the powerful. She recognized that courage was God's agency, God's power at work in her and the world. To her cousin Elizabeth, she exclaimed, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things." This is kind of agency, the kind of courage that our sexual minority students need. It's why when they are missing that gift of faith and explicit faith, they're missing such an important source of strength for their lives. As I mentioned, I have found that healing this fourth wound of being powerless is challenging for everyone involved. And so when I reflect back on what I observed going on around me, on why is this agency thing so hard? Well, when you consider that this need interferes with the normal running of the school, and it interferes with keeping things quiet. Every organization resists things that disturb its balance. And so when somebody comes and says, "We want to do a pride event, we want time for this, we want money for that," and so on, you're disturbing the balance that's set up in the school. And the very nature of organizations is such as, well, you're going to have to explain and justify doing that, because that's the way human organizations are. They want balance. And so don't be surprised then that you run into the attitude of, can't you just be quiet, just go away, stop pushing. It takes a listening attitude to be open to somebody coming and saying, we want to be heard and we want to do this. Another reason why it's challenging is because we have to discern, well, is it good for you to do this or not to do this? Let's take the example again of, let's say students come and the teacher comes, want to fly a gay pride flag. Well, there's nothing in scripture or tradition that says that we should or shouldn't fly a gay pride flag. I even looked in the Concordance, couldn't find anything on gay pride flag. So we got to go by something else here. Nothing that says what it means to those seeing such a flag. Someone might say that Cardinal Ratzinger's pastoral letter in 1986 said that there shouldn't be gay events on Catholic properties. But someone else might say that Pope Francis is encouraging ministry to sexual minority persons, which in the US occurs on Catholic properties. Which Pope do you want? So decision about things like this requires prudent discernment in each case.
Can you please provide the proof of that Pope Francis said, please? The reference which Francis said, please.
I didn't understand the question.
Please provide me the reference which Pope Francis said, please.
I think we're going to wait until after the presentation before we do a Q&A. There's going to be a Q&A after. Okay. So okay. You'll be able to ask your questions by using in the reactions. There's a hand up feature. So when we get to the Q&A, you can ask questions.
Okay, thanks, Charles, please.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll come to some of the things that Pope Francis has done. So the decision, you may have to ask questions. Okay, what does such a flag mean to the sexual minority students, to the broader student body, to the school staff, to school parents, to the parish, to the broader public, to the church in general, to the pastor, and which perspective is the most important? So when you are dealing with questions such as this, you have to ask, is this good or is it not good? And you don't have the black and white answers. It's challenging. And you have to go through a process of discernment. Another question that comes up when we're dealing with this difficult issue is, whose business is it? Who's supposed to decide on issues like this? So Catholics respect both an overseeing episcopal authority as well as local authority. It's the role of the bishop to oversee Catholic education in schools in their diocese. Yet the Catholic principle of subsidiarity means that those making decisions should be as close to the local action as possible. In other words, there are relative boundaries. Catholic schools function as a team with pastors, parents, and educators. While they are inseparably connected, each has authority over and responsibility for their particular area. It all presupposes excellent communication. And of course, it's clear, as I mentioned, that it's a bishop who's got the main responsibility, but we're talking about the relative boundaries set up by subsidiarity. So who is going to be making the decision at which level and why? And you want good communication here. Another question arises concerning outside actors. How does an administrator or superintendent respond when a political party and government gets involved in promoting various actions in the school, as we saw with the NDP and as apparently, who is it, David Parker is threatening to do with the UCP? When people come and want to influence our boards and what we're doing, how do we treat that? Another question is what is being, and this also I think makes these situations challenging, is what is being asked for respectful and proportionate? All interactions in Catholic schools should be characterized by respect and love. Besides mutual dialogue and listening, this also includes following the procedures for consultation and decision-making that have been put into place. When these policies and procedures are healthy, issues can be addressed in a productive way. But political actions for agency are often very messy. The combination of persons involved, passions ignited, and narrow issue focus can lead to disrespect and actions out of proportion and balance. A school administrator confronted with a group of students requesting that the school fly a gay pride flag, for example, has to consider whether what they are asking is proportionate to the need being addressed and whether they are going about it in a respectful way. Does the request respect the teaching of the Church on sexual minority persons? It is unreasonable and disrespectful to expect a Catholic school to contradict Catholic teaching. As mentioned, to many of these questions, there's no black and white answer. It takes discernment in each situation. So to summarize, promoting a sense of agency among our sexual minority students is challenging, but essential. When they propose an action in this direction, we are faced with questions such as, is it worth it? Is it good? Whose business is it? Is it respectful and proportionate? And reflecting back over the years, I think that it's a challenge to us. I'll give an example of where I think it's better now. I remember once driving down to Edmonton from Fort McMurray, and I think I was calling Bishop Paul, or he called me, and we were talking. I forget what the topic was, but he brought up to me that a parent had phoned him saying that somebody had put up a poster, I think it was Father Mercredi or Holy Trinity, a Pride Week poster or something like that. And so what struck me about that, thinking back on it a number of years later, is this is precisely the situation you don't want to be happening. What you want to see is the communication going on between parents, schools, parish, and the diocese is so good that you wouldn't have this happening. Someone would have phoned me or would have phoned the principal or superintendent or the pastor or would have known about it. Does a bishop down in St. Paul need to know about it? Well, it depends, you know, what's going on. The point I'm trying to make that goes with this last one about the challenge we have is we need to be in good communication with each other. We need to be talking all the time. So those are 4 wounds that I see that we need. For this last wound, the questions we have is how can we help sexual minority students find the courage to come out of the closet, so to speak? How can we help parishes form support groups for our sexual minority students? Is there something they can learn from the adult support groups like the one in Calgary Diocese called Courage? How can we help these students find their agency, their public voice to advocate for their rights, both in our schools and in the broader public arena? And how can we help these students find their public courage and strength in the Spirit of Christ? So let the children come to me and do not hinder them. That is the core of Catholic education. Sexual minority students can suffer 4 wounds in which the Spirit cries, Abba, Father, or wounds that hinder them from coming to Christ, being alone, being bullied, being labeled bad, and lacking agency. Pope Francis calls us to be a field hospital for them, to stop the bleeding. We need to protect and help them heal these wounds. As we have seen, if we are to do this, we need a lot of communication and collaboration among parish, parents, and school. Pope Francis has had a document written to guide us in this task. It was written partially to address disagreements whether gay couples and civil unions could teach in Catholic schools. It emphasizes the need for dialogue and communication in issues like this. Some things that Pope Francis has said that we need to keep in mind. Pope Francis has said that while homosexuality is sinful, he's not changed anything. It is not a crime. He has also said that there should be a place for gay couples in what he calls civil unions in society. He continues the church's calls for pastoral care and support of sexual minority persons, often meeting with them. And as I indicated already, very much aware of the support groups working in the United States. He has met with these people frequently and support groups elsewhere. Often meeting them and including pastoral blessings. And so we need to keep that in mind also. So at this point, Chris, I've gone quite long, gone close to 40 minutes, I believe. And so I think it'd be a good time to stop.
Okay, thank you so much for your wisdom, Charlie, and thank you so much for sharing your reflections. If you have a question, excuse me, if you have a question for Charles, we'll ask if you look at the bottom there, you'll see the reactions tab. You can click the reactions tab. You'll be able to click the raise hand button. And what'll happen, like you can see in mine, a little hand will be raised up there. Now, one of the things we will ask you today, if you have a question for Charles, is before asking your question, could you please introduce yourself to him so Charles knows who he's talking to and it can be a bit of a dialogue?
Hi, Mr. Charles. My name is Peter from Fort McMurray, and I just want to know who marginalized the students? Who marginalized the students? Who takes the initiative to marginalize students?
And so, Peter, when you're asking that question, are you asking what I saw happening at school? Or are you asking what I see beyond school? Are you asking me what I have observed?
But can you please repeat once again, please, Mr. Charles?
Yes, Peter. So you're asking me who marginalizes sexual minority students
Students in the school.
in the school?
Yeah.
When I've listened to them, there seem to be not just one form of marginalization. There seem to be a number of forms of marginalization. Some are actually physical threats. Some are actually physical intimidation. So I have listened to students talking about that kind of, I don't call that marginalization, that's actually violence, a form of violence. Chris and others could respond to that too. I've been away for 5 years, but I still keep hearing those stories. And I've heard students talk about that kind of marginalization where they don't feel safe, not just in the school, but once they leave the school or once they're in town and in other places, so that they're often afraid. So there are people out there who, I don't know where that comes from. I was beat up by people like that. What are they thinking? Where are they coming from? I mean, where somebody who doesn't know me, Peter, comes down a sidewalk, swings a bottle, and if they would have hit me just a little bit of a different place, I would be dead. Why does somebody do that? Who marginalized? I have no idea why somebody would do that.
I'm not asking about in the public. I'm asking within the Catholic school atmosphere, within the Catholic schools.
No, I'm talking about within the Catholic school. Peter, let me tell you a story where I began on all of this. I was in the school district for 2 years, and then a mom came to me, very, very angry and crying. Her son had almost committed suicide. Her son was gay. This would have been around 1998, 99 when she came to me. And, you know, if you're a parent, if your child would almost commit suicide because they were being bullied, you know how concerned and angry you would be, right? So I could understand her anger. And she said, how could you let this happen in a Catholic school? I thought this was a Catholic school. And she so shook me with her insight that this is just the opposite of what a Catholic school is, that her son almost commits suicide. It was then that I went to the religious education network, people who worked in a position like mine. I said, we have to ask our bishops to give us a document because this kind of thing is happening to our gay students in our school. And so we as a group, through our superintendents, contacted the bishops, and Bishop Henry wrote us with the bishops a wonderful document to help guide us. So, Peter, that was in a Catholic school.
Mr. Charles, I feel within the school Catholic schools,
Yeah.
within Catholic schools, we have so many promoters among teachers, among principals, to practice this evil, and encouraging students to practice this evil. That's what I feel.
Well, yeah, I hear if what you're saying is that teachers and students are encouraging other students to be gay and so on, I'm not here to respond to that tonight, Peter. My whole focus is, why did we extend the care, and why do we extend the care that we are giving to our sexual minority students? And it's basically, that's what we do. We protect and we help heal. And it's like Pope Francis's field hospital. And as to your question, well, I personally did not experience that. And I think our focus was, all those questions I asked after each section, all those questions, that's where we were focused. Like, when you have parents who kick their child out of their home, and so you got a middle school student who's not at home and who's living in different houses, like, you got to respond to that. So that's what I was talking about, Peter, was the this is what Catholics do, and this is what Catholic schools do. We stop the bleeding. We pick up the wounded. We pick up the injured. And Pope Francis gave us a wonderful document on how to do this. He said, look, this is difficult stuff because we all have strong feelings for it. And he said, they're meeting some schools which are saying, get rid of that teacher because that teacher is gay and he's living with another person. You got other schools saying, oh, he's a good teacher and we want to keep him. And they're both Catholic schools. And this fighting is going on in the church. And so the Pope wrote a document to answer that. But at the end of the document, it's the most important part. Like at St. Joseph's College a year and a half ago, we put on a presentation about these issues in the document. And I did the last part of the document where Pope Francis says, look, these are difficult issues. They have split other churches. If you look at the Anglicans and so on, he says, this will not happen to us. He said, as Catholics, we hold ourselves together in unity. And he said, we don't run from the conflict, but we will let the conflict be a way of bringing us together. The way ahead is not to do, my Protestant friends seem more comfortable with this. It's just, you don't agree with the pastor or something, you break up and start another congregation. We don't do that as Catholics. Unity is one of the gifts. We believe in one holy Catholic Church, and unity is the sign of Christ among us. So in that whole last part of the document, the Pope says the way forward is dialogue. You got to keep talking with each other. Another word for it is synodality. And people say, well, can't you make that more concrete and so on and tell us what is right and what is wrong and so on? And the Pope is saying, first of all, you've got to learn to walk the way of dialogue. And so that's the second thing I wanted to say tonight, really, is we're kind of doing it now. We got to talk. We got to dialogue. We got to listen. Otherwise, this will rip the church apart. And this is just part of what we face. So anyways, Peter, I don't know. I don't think I've answered your question, but I don't think your question was what I was dealing with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mr. Charles, I just want to share something, just a minute. When we made, why do we categorize these students within the Catholic schools? Why do we marginalize? Why do we make a separation for these students? Why do we approach them with a humility, compassion, and a humble manner, and to join with them the other students? We have only two gender, male and female. According to the Bible, according to the Catholic teaching, there is no third gender. So include everything without any discrimination. That is what Jesus says: humility, compassion, and belongingness. That's what we want. We don't want any kinds of categorization within the school system. We don't want any separation among.
Well, yeah. I again, that's not quite what I was dealing with tonight. Like, the issue of transgender and the issue of homosexual orientation, we're dealing with two quite different issues. So wasn't going into that. But let me say, Peter, that it would be my fondest wish that we did not need to have so-called support groups, so-called separate activities going on, that we didn't need to reach out in a special way because there was no more need for that. That's where we would like to be.
Thank you so much for your question, Peter, and thank you so much for your responses and your reflections, Charles. Anyone else, if you'd like to, you can, again, go to the reactions tab, click on reactions, and you'll see a raise hand option. We do have some time for questions. So if you do have a question, please feel free to put up your hand, introduce yourself to Charles, and Charles will be happily enter into some questioning. Well, thank you, everybody. It doesn't look like we have any questions going up. I'll check all the different registrants here, but I don't see any more hands. So once again, if you do have a question, you just need to click that reactions tab, hit raise hand. But on behalf of us all, I'd like to thank Charles for his wisdom, his reflections, and his willingness to come and talk tonight.